I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Pip Williams, who is an author of that she's written several nonfiction books, and well, a memoir is one of them, and a nonfiction book. And she has written her first novel, and it is right here. We both have it right here. uh, it's uh, it's a dictionary of lost words. Um, Pip, could for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you write?
Well, like you said, I've written a lot of things over the years because I used to be an academic, and I was interested in how people lived good lives. Really, that's what I wrote about. Um, but what I'm writing now is historical fiction, and this book that we're talking about, the Dictionary of Lost Words, is basically based on the real story of the development of the Oxford English Dictionary, which was an incredible project that was started around 1857 and wasn't completed. The first edition of the dictionary wasn't completed until 1928. So about 70 years it took for a whole lot of people to collate and define every word in the English language that was in current use, but also words that had already become obsolete. So that was the goal. My book explores really the role of women in that project. And the reason I wrote fiction is because when I went to, I suppose, when I put my academic hat on, I was interested in women's words because I had read another book by Simon Winchester. In Australia and the UK, it's called The Surgeon of Crowthorne, but you would know it as The Professor and the Madman. And I'm sure a lot of your people watching will have read that book. And I read that book and loved it. But I also was curious about how the dictionary was put together, and I realized that it was a gendered activity, that it had to be biased towards the meaning of words as they were for men, because it was men who put the dictionary together, and it was the books that were written by men that were their source material. So a word can't be in the dictionary unless it has been written down, and this was the key to the novel for me. First of all, like I said, it was just a bit of curiosity, and I think all writing, all novels, all fiction in particular, starts with curiosity. And I was curious to know whether the way the dictionary was put together meant that some words had been left out or some meanings had been left out. And when I tried to look that up just to satisfy my curiosity, I couldn't find anything. And so I decided to put a little girl beneath the sorting table where all of the words for the English language were being defined, and then follow her as she grew into a woman. And just to explore, how does she affect the words and how do the words affect her? And that's where it started.
So that was really the inspiration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that you have done a lot of research because you've done academic papers and things like that. So, how much research did you do for this book?
I did a lot, and I think it was like you said. My background is as a social researcher, and so the process of research was something that was familiar to me, and it was also something I really enjoyed. And so when I started to write this book, I realized that I needed to understand the real history. I needed to know how the dictionary had been put together and who the main people were and where it happened, all those sorts of things, why it happened. I needed to understand how a word was chosen for the dictionary, and then what the process was from deciding that a word needed to go in, to creating a definition, to typesetting it, to printing it, to proofreading it, all those sorts of things. It sounds so detailed, but in some ways, when you're writing fiction, and this is the wonderful thing about doing research for fiction compared to doing research for academic work.
Mhm.
When you do research for academic work, you have to be so rigorous in your in the way that you present that research. You cannot deviate at all from what you find. But when you write fiction, in some ways, the beauty of the research is that you go in and you do all of this detailed research. You find out all these bits of information, you read all these letters, you read all these books, you see all these things, but then you put them aside. And in some ways, the writing of the fiction would be interrupted if I was writing and then constantly looking at books, which is what I would have done if I was an academic. But as a fiction writer, I've put all that research aside and I just write the story. And the story comes out of the research that floats to the top of my brain, if that makes sense. Because the things that float to the top of my brain are the things I found interesting. They're the little bits and pieces that I remembered, and I remembered them because they were interesting. And if I thought they were interesting, a reader might think they're interesting. And they're the things that end up in the novel. And of course, I will then go back and double check if it's particularly around the words. In my novel, every single word that I say is in the dictionary, and any quotations I give, any definitions I give, are the real definitions from the first edition. And the first edition has now been superseded by a second edition, and currently they're working on a third edition. So it's always being updated, but I was only interested in that first edition. And just for anyone who's watching, I have a first edition of A and B here. And that's interesting too, because earlier I told you why I started writing this book, but actually there was another beautiful nugget of fact that came to me early on in my research, and that was that one word went missing from the Oxford English Dictionary, and that word was bondmaid, and bondmaid means slave girl. And I read this little anecdote in lots of non-fiction books about the dictionary, about how the dictionary was made. I found it in various places, but never was it ever explained. And so nobody knows how this word went missing. They just know that it was missing because James Murray, who was the editor of the Oxford English Dictionary, he received a letter from a member of the public years after the publication of this book, about 7 years after it had been published. He received a letter asking why the word bondmaid wasn't in the dictionary. And it was the first he knew of it. And apparently he lost his temper. And then he had to write letters to all sorts of people, assuring them that it was the only word that had ever gone missing from the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, this I found completely wishful thinking on his part. But the thing about the missing word, and particularly the type of word that it was a word about women, bondmaid, slave girl. The fact that no one knew how it went missing was just a little bit of gold for a fiction writer, because suddenly I had the start of my story. I put that little girl, as I said, under the sorting table in the scriptorium, which is what the building was called, where they collected the words. And I had that word fall into her lap, and I had her keep it. And that's how the word goes missing. And that was the start of the story.
That's great. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out the Dictionary of Lost Words?
Well, there are challenges always. Anybody out there who is a writer, and so many people are, whether you're published or not, a lot of people are writers. They write. And sometimes they're not even writing, they're just thinking of the writing. And I always think that, I did that for years and years, and I now think I've been a writer for years and years, even if I might not have published anything until more recently. But the hardest challenge, they vary. But I think for me, one of the biggest challenges was actually having the confidence to continue writing the story. So I had written, besides being an academic, it's a very different type of writing. So I don't think of that when I think of my writing career now as a creative writer, I don't really think of my academic writing because I had to unlearn so much. No one would want to read a novel in the style of an academic of an academic paper. So I had to learn, in a way, relearn how to write. And so when I started writing, I wrote a travel memoir, a memoir of a story, the story of my family, really, working our way around Italy on organic farms. And I wrote that memoir, and for me that was like an apprenticeship. But I always wanted to write fiction. And when I started this book, I realized that actually the subject matter was so big, and in some ways I think important, because it is about how women, specifically, but more generally, people from diverse educational backgrounds, people from diverse cultural backgrounds, linguistic backgrounds, anyone who finds themselves not in the power, in the strata of power, anyone who is not in that group of people, this book is about them in a way, because it's about how they're represented in language. And if you are not represented in language, you are not represented, full stop. And this is what I had in the back of my mind, that I had stumbled upon an idea, and Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this notion of ideas just coming to you, and you have to nurture them or they'll move on and they'll find someone else to write about them. Well, this idea had come to me, and it was one of those ideas that I think was sitting in plain sight. I was looking at the dictionaries on my bookshelf, and I had never in my whole life, and I'm an academic. I think about these things, and not once had I thought that the dictionaries on my shelf were subjective, that they were biased. I had never thought that in my life. In fact, I'd thought the opposite, and everybody had told me the opposite. That, if you want to know the meaning of something, look it up in the dictionary. And the dictionary is never wrong. And suddenly I thought, hang on a minute, the dictionary might be wrong. And it might be wrong because guess what? Humans made it. And humans are often wrong. And not just humans, but one type of human made it. An educated Victorian man made the dictionary. And when I say man, I mean men in general, but they were all the same. They were all white. They were all old. They were all of a Victorian sensibility. They were all well educated. None of them had been in a birthing room. None of them had slaved over a hot range in a kitchen. None of them have been down a coal mine. And it occurred to me suddenly that actually those dictionaries are not the arbiters of truth, that they are problematic. And that was such a big idea that my biggest hurdle in terms of writing the book was to write it, was to commit to writing it, because I'd never written a novel before. And I was really nervous about ruining the idea. I could write a novel about the dictionary and it could be really bad. And suddenly that beautiful singular idea has been trampled all over by someone who didn't know what they were doing. And I think that was my biggest fear. And so I did write it in secret, essentially. I wrote the
Really?
whole thing before I showed it to anybody. Because if you write in secret, there's no risk.
True.
It's the most wonderful thing, actually, writing in secret. When I say secret, my friends knew what I was doing, my partner knew what I was doing, but I did have a publisher and they did not know what I was doing, because I didn't want to commit this story to the public in a way. I wanted to be able to sort of write it, and then if I felt like I hadn't done the idea justice, I could put it away and no one need know that I'd attempted it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so that was probably the biggest hurdle. And that's a very kind of esoteric thing. In terms of, the practice of it, I'd say that, you know what, I loved writing this. I say now I loved every minute, but I'm right in the middle of editing my next book and realizing that this process is so hard. And it can be so difficult. And sometimes I say to myself, I don't remember it being this hard last time. And then I think, that's exactly what I said about childbirth. you know, the second time round, you go, I don't remember it hurting so much. And books are really similar. There's this gestation, and then there's this delivery, and the delivery hurts. But then you forget about it because you have this beautiful book,
The
like a
birth of a
baby,
book.
at the end of it. And so you forget about the painful bits, and then it happens again, and you go, oh, hang on a minute.
Okay,
Um,
speaking
so,
of your next book, what can we expect from you in the future?
oh, well, look, I'll give you a sneak peek. While I was waiting to say hello to you, I was reading through my draft.
Ah,
So I have it right here. So my next book, the working title is The Bookbinder of Jericho, and it's actually a companion book to the Dictionary of Lost Words. So it's not a prequel or a sequel, but it holds hands, if you like, with the Dictionary of Lost Words. And this story is set during World War One. It's a much shorter time frame. It's bounded by when the men walk out of Oxford University Press to march to war, and it goes to the end of the war. And it's all about a woman that works in the bindery of the press, and she folds the pages and gathers the sections of books and sews them together. And she's been told that her job is to bind the books, not read them. But all she's ever wanted, is to go to Oxford University. She wants to read the books and she wants to write the books, but she's told that she can't do that. And she's a working class woman, and this is early 20th century, and really universities were not open to her. And so this is her story. It's about how the war really changes everything for women, but sometimes not as much as you need it to.
oh,
Yeah.
that sounds
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. So what is your favorite part about being a writer?
I look, my favorite part, because I am a full-time writer now. In fact, my writing career has coincided perfectly with COVID. I left my job one day before we went into lockdown, before the whole world went into lockdown. I had my last day of work, full-time work, and I became a full-time writer. And it was just before the Dictionary of Lost Words was published in Australia. And since then, I've been writing every day, and I do write every day. I write 7 days a week unless I'm on holiday or away for the weekend. And my habit really, and the thing I love about writing is that for me, it's a bit like a meditation. So I love that I get to do it every day. I really enjoy writing. I really look forward to doing it. And that's partly because I write in coffee shops, and coffee shops are my favorite place in the world. They're my happy place. If someone makes me a coffee and puts it in front of me, I'm theirs really. And so I have taken my writing practice into my local cafe, and that's my day. That's my daily habit. I get up in the morning and I get dressed and I go to the cafe and I write, and the world just sort of exists around me, which is perfect for me. I really enjoy that. I'm lucky. I'm one of those people who can write with a lot of noise and activity going on around me. In fact, I find it really difficult to write in the quiet space of my home, of my office. So I do have to get out. And that, I think, is my favorite part. It's the slowing down of my life. My working life could be quite busy, and frantic, and I feel like I've slowed down, and I'm contemplating more, and enjoying it very much.
One thing I neglected to mention, I'm sure people have probably already figured this out from your accent, that you are in Australia.
I am in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
I live in the Adelaide Hills in South Australia.
right.
Yeah.
And but so when you're writing, it's in a cafe. So that's what your writing space is. And so there's music sometimes, or people walking
Always.
around, or
Yeah.
anything else, right? So you need to have coffee with you, or
I
food or
have to
something
have
like that.
coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did this thing when I wrote my memoir, my travel memoir. I didn't really have any kind of writing practice at all. And to be absolutely honest, I hated writing, but I loved having written, if that makes sense. Anyone out there who's a
Absolutely.
writer will understand what I'm saying. Sitting down and getting started was so difficult. It was always so difficult. And I used to play these mind games with myself. I wouldn't write unless my day was free. I had no appointments, no catch ups, no work. All the conditions had to be perfect for writing, and yet when they were, I would still find things to procrastinate with, and it would still take me hours to sit down. And as soon as I'd sat down and the writing had started to flow, then I realized I had to pick my kids up from school. My best writing always happened in the 15 minutes before I had to race off to school. Deadlines can do that, I think. But basically, when I started writing my novel, I realized I needed a much better relationship with writing, or my mental health would suffer, because all those days I didn't write, all those days I didn't achieve the word count that I wanted. At the end of those days I was depressed, like
Mhm.
quite literally I
Yeah.
was depressed. And I knew that I couldn't sustain that kind of a relationship with the work that I did, or I couldn't keep doing the work. So when I started writing this novel, I my background was in psychology. So I applied a few very first year psychology principles to my writing. I did a bit of Pavlovian conditioning on myself, and I decided the thing I loved best in the world was coffee, made by somebody else. And so I took my laptop along to the coffee shop and nothing else, no book to read, no, diary to jot in. And I ordered a coffee and I sat down, and I wasn't allowed to sip the coffee until I'd written my first word. And that was the other thing. I also decided that one of the problems I had previously was high expectations. I had to write 1,000 words a day. And eventually I wrote 750 words, or had to write 750 words a day. And I kept reducing it down to eventually 300 words a day, which is what Virginia Woolf's word count goal was. I thought, surely I can write 300 words a day. And I even failed to do that. So every time you fail to reach a goal or an expectation, it damages you a little bit. And so I also decided that not only would I condition myself to love the activity of writing, because I'm linking it to the joy I get from coffee, I will also lower my expectations as far as possible. And so my word count goal every day is one. All I have to do is write one word a day. And I have never failed to achieve to achieve my word goal. And in fact, I exceed it constantly, because once you've opened the laptop or opened your notebook and you've written one word, it is almost impossible to stop. Um, the problem I had with writing, and I think a lot of people have with writing, is getting started. It's the
Yes.
same problem we have with exercise. It's putting our shoes on, our runners on, and walking out the door. It's not the walking around the park or the neighborhood, it's the getting out the door that is hard. And so those two things have meant that my writing life is now actually very joyous, except during the editing phase. I feel like I'm pushing a basketball.
So is that a good piece of advice that you would give to other writers, is to just give yourself a word count of one and keep going?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's worked for me. Look, yes, look, everyone is different. Some people are far more, I wouldn't say disciplined. I don't know what it is. Everyone is different. You do have to know yourself. But if you if you have a problem with procrastination, and if it is the prospect of sitting down and writing 1,000 words that is actually getting in your way, then move that stone out of the way, and just put a pebble there. You know, the pebble is one word. That's not so hard. It's going to take you 5 minutes. So you don't have to have a clear day to write. If all you're writing is one word, you just need 5 minutes at some point in the day. Easy peasy. We all have 5 minutes in the day. Occasionally we don't, but most often we do. We have half an hour between, while the pasta is cooking. There's moments which many of us as writers would never consider a writing moment because it's between busy things. But actually, you can write 10, 15, 20 words in half an hour. You can write three really great sentences, which could give you, that could be the springboard for an excellent scene. And I kind of think that has really worked for me, and it's partly the lowering of expectations and the increasing of my satisfaction and mental health, really,
Mhm.
around the activity of writing.
That's great.
It's been fantastic. Yeah.
That's a great idea. I just have two more questions for you because we're kind of running out of time. One is, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I need to do this plug in every video. Excuse me. You can get Pip's book, The Dictionary of Lost Words, at Annie's if you call 508-796-5613, or you can send us an email at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your work?
Well, I actually would highly encourage people to get it from your bookstore. Um, Bookstores, independent bookstores, bookstores around the world, and this was my experience in Australia, they saved us during COVID lockdowns. If it wasn't for bookstores, many more of us would be taking antidepressants and or higher doses than the ones we're already on. Um, and I cannot I can't support them enough. I really can't. But if you can't get to a local bookstore, you can get this book absolutely anywhere. And it was a Reese Witherspoon Book Club book. So
Yes.
you can also get it from their website. Um, but you can get it from all of the usual places, which I won't advertise because I think I would prefer to spend my time on independent bookstores.
Okay.
But you can get it everywhere, really.
Great.
And hopefully my next book will be out sometime in 2023 in the United States. And I really, yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing how people receive it, because there are a few characters that cross over between the two books,
Ah,
and
excellent.
not many, but a couple. And it's also been a joy to write. I've really enjoyed writing it, but a
Great.
very different story, a very different woman. So
Okay.
yeah.
Great. Next question is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Okay. Um, I'm not on any social media. So
Ah,
yeah, I know. So I unfortunately you can you can pen me a letter, or you can send me an email. I do have a website, which
okay.
has bits and pieces of things I've written, and it does have a contact me, and that will come to me as an email. Um, but I'm not on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or anything.
But you
So,
have a website.
but I do have a website, which is fairly inactive, but it's pretty up to date. Um, yeah, so I'm sorry for not being able to interact on social media, but again, if you want to write,
You need more time to write and not to
Time.
do all the social
So
media.
yeah, being I'm not I wouldn't be a natural social media user, but I am I think glad I'm not on it at this point in my life. And life is very busy, I think, and I'm not quite sure how disciplined I'd be if I was on various platforms. I think I'd spend a lot of time checking them. So
Exactly. You do get
yeah,
lost in it.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Pip, for joining me. I've really enjoyed our conversation and I'm really enjoying your book. If you ever do get to the Boston or Worcester area, please come and join us.
Oh, I'd love to. I can't tell you how much I would love to. Thank you so much, Selena. It's been just lovely meeting you. Really nice.
Thank you so much. And we will be seeing you.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.